One. Well, it's a good evening from the Cape York Peninsula up on top of Queensland. It's only a short distance from Cape York across to Papua New Guinea. We're only 4 kilometres from the tip, and tomorrow we're going to go around and then do the tinny across to the beach and then get the photos there of you being to the top. But anyway, it's been an eventful day, 12-hour sailing trip today. You can hear the noise of the boys starting up the hot showers. So without further ado, it's great to see Sandra back, and without any further ado, Andreen, I'll pass you on to you, and then I will mute myself because the boys here are all hungry and they're going to be cooking. So just to give you a heads up. Thank you, Sandra. Thanks for coming.
Morning, Jeffrey, or evening. Hello, Sandra, and welcome to everybody that's tuned in to Dreaming the New Dream, or if you're listening to a replay. And today it's the 5th of June 2025, and it's my great pleasure to have Dr. Sandra Tuszynska back on the show. And I was just checking to see when we last had you on the show, and it was the 19th of May 2022. It was 3 years ago. I couldn't believe it. Anyway, I met Sandra. God, done it, Jess. I met Sandra many, many years ago through a friend in Brisbane, and it was funny because I would arrive at our friends and she would arrive, or another time I would be there and she would arrive, and vice versa. So we always seem to come at the same time from different sides of, Australia. Anyway, without further ado, welcome, and it's so lovely to have you back on the show.
Thank you very much for having me.
Right, and so I don't know if you want to give a little brief intro, because I know you were born and raised in Poland, and I know last time you spoke on the show about fungi, and like I said before, and after seeing you on the show and listening to you about fungi, everywhere I go now, I see fungi. I never saw it before. So, and I've taken lots of pictures of it. So I know today's not going to be so much about the fungi, because you're going to talk about soil, and you're going to share creative superheroes of the love story of soil, which just sounds fascinating. So I'm really looking forward to your sharing about soil and poop loop and bacteria and all sorts of things. So without further ado, let's start right at the beginning, and in a nutshell you can share what you want to share, because I know you've got a powerful message to get out today.
Yeah, sure. Yep, I'm happy to share. Do you want me to just give you a bit of a background? Is that what you're asking?
Yeah, I think that would be nice. I think it was 3 years ago, so we've probably got different listeners to what we had then.
Yeah, so basically, yes, I come from Poland originally, but since I was 12, lived in Australia, and I got my education and my PhD in Australia. So yeah, it was basically in agricultural science, so in Sydney University. And basically, yeah, just I've learned a lot about how bad agriculture is, to be honest, and it was very depressing to me. I think I might have been the only student that was actually depressed by what I was hearing, but just getting the light a bit better. It's a bit annoying. So the soil was something that I could work with. I didn't want to do the animal agriculture because it was all about how to slaughter or how to poison animals and how to treat them with all kinds of chemicals. So I didn't like it at all. And it was about control and, harming them in very bad ways. So I cried a lot during those 4 years of uni, but the first year in particular was very hard for me to watch and experience. So I went vegan within the first year. I was like, I can't consume animals anymore, how they were treated while alive. The killing is not so much of a problem. It's mostly just the mistreatment of animals in agricultural systems. It's very much about money, and it's about exploitation and using these poor creatures that have very, very poor lives and suffer a lot. And then I did plant science, and it wasn't much better, to be honest. It was all about chemicals, and the plant side of things were also it was all about chemical use, basically. And I knew in my heart that there was something severely wrong with that. And I have grown up in a system where there was no chemicals back in communist Poland at the time. And so everything was we grew our own vegetables and food, wasn't very, there was a lot of other poisons put onto the land in the forest and stuff during the sort of Soviet era. But at the same time, our food that we produced was grown organically. So plants were out, animals were out. Microbiology was something I could do without feeling terrible. And I realized through the lessons I was learning, and the lectures were all about, there was like an environmental microbiology component. And I just loved it because it was all about how microbes can actually clean up the mess, clean up soils, clean up oil spills on the oceans. A lot of it was about bacteria. There was not much about fungi. We didn't learn much about fungi at all, in fact. But during my PhD, when I was looking for how do I research more into this fascinating area of bioremediation, which is using organisms such as fungi and bacteria to actually decompose certain chemicals or clean up pollutants such as heavy metals. So I ended up studying fungi, and that brought me into my great passion for fungi. But at the same time, while fungi are just fascinating and amazing, and there's so many things they can do, there are all these other creatures that also work with fungi, such as bacteria and the organisms that feed on fungi and bacteria in the soil that actually are required in order for fungi to actually deliver their full potential, and for bacteria to do so also, by little creatures consuming these smaller organisms. And because fungi and bacteria are so full of nutrients, they directly absorb nutrients or gain nutrients, pick up nutrients from the soil matrix. They are the most rich organisms in terms of nutrients on Earth. And even though they're the tiniest, they're also the most dense in terms of nutrient acquisition. And so anything that eats a bacterium or a fungal cell releases those nutrients, and those nutrients become available to the plant, and this is how plants feed. So basically, the process of consuming fungi and bacteria, the released excess nutrients in every creature that consumes them provides food for the plant. And maybe I can show a little presentation of that, or an image of that, really, so that you can have a look at what that looks like. So let me just share. Yeah, I just thought it'd be nice to show that. Actually, I'll do an image file first. I wonder if it will let me choose. So there we go. So I'll show this image first. It's not really working. It's showing the video, but that's not what I wanted. It's showing the video I was going to show anyway. I'll just go back to the beginning. I can show it to you this way and just pause it. So there's an issue with my file, it tells me. Anyway, you can look at it from the video here. So basically the sun is the provider. So we call this the poop loop. It's an endearing name for the soil food web. I think it was coined by Ingham and another soil person. And basically the idea is that all the nutrients that we gain from carbon dioxide that we breathe out, and that carbon is fixed from using the sun, water, and the outbreath that we provide. And the carbon dioxide is basically fixed into a sugar form or carbohydrate, and it goes into the plant. And those carbohydrates also come from the dead organic matter once the plant dies. And also nitrogen and other minerals, nitrogen in particular, nitrogen gas is fixed via organisms in the soil, and the plant is able to then take up those nutrients, and that's carbohydrates and nitrogen. But from the soil matrix, plants pick up from the bacteria and the fungi all the other minerals, essential, micronutrients and everything like that. So that's how plants feed. So there's this symbiosis between us, the excretors of carbon dioxide, and that carbon draw down into the soil via plants through the process of photosynthesis. So the fungi and the bacteria in the soil then they actually have the most nutrient in them, and that's what the N stands for, nutrients. And so they are very, very rich in these nutrients. But to release those nutrients from them and feed the plant, we need to have the little creatures that do that. And these are the creatures that we'll be talking about in this in this sort of poop loop scenario. And you can call them grazers, or we can call them predators, whatever you like. But these are the protozoa and nematodes, and anything else, and anything that they consume, so the fungi or bacteria, depending on what they prefer, they will release the excess, and they will actually provide, they also become food for other creatures. And every time a creature consumes those creatures that ate the bacteria and fungi, they will also have too much nutrients in them, so they will release those as poo, and that will go back to the plant. So every time someone poos, the plant is fertilized, and this is exactly how plants are meant to feed. And every time we have a higher order creature, all the way to animals and us, we have least amount of nutrients in our poo, but the really first line of provision is through these beautiful little creatures. So if you have any questions, please do ask, but I'll continue with the little video that I prepared earlier for you guys to have a look at those little creatures. I thought it'd be very fun if you saw them live, like I've them via the microscope, and I think talking about them, as I usually do, give a presentation with imagery and everything, and it's a you can actually watch the whole course that I've made on each of these creatures, which I'll tell you about later, called the soil restoration course. But I'll just show you videos because I think it's cool to see them, and I rarely do this, but I'm going to try and do that more and more now. So this is an amoeba, so a protozoa, just meaning a really one-celled organism. So the whole animal, you can say it's a cell. It's not really an animal, but initially they were thought to be animals. And I just sped them up, but that's an amoeba. And the little thing that's floating around is a flagellate. And you can see another one just zoomed by. So these are all organisms that feed on bacteria. And bacteria are those tiny little dots floating around, the smallest ones. They're the bacteria. And I just sped this up and put it up on YouTube because I thought it was really fun to speed up the amoeba moving forward.
Well, it's not something we would normally see, is it?
No, definitely not. It is something so rare to see, actually. And amoeba are not very easy to come by because all these organisms, you can imagine, through agricultural extreme environments that we create in ecosystems, these organisms need to be present. However, we've destroyed them a lot. And I just want to go back a little bit because actually there was another organism that I should have shown you first of all. Let's just see if it comes up. So there's our... Oh, no, that's right. I gave them... No.
Did you come up with the name
Sorry.
of Poop Blue? Did you come up with the name
No,
of
no. As I said earlier,
all right.
No, I said earlier that Elaine Ingham and another lady, I forget, someone else called it endearingly that. Anyway, I don't have the fungi there on the photo, and photos are not showing. It's a pity I didn't include them in the end, but I wanted to show you the movable organisms. But amoebae and other protozoa, so one cell creature, they basically consume bacteria. So I'll just go a little bit forward with this. I don't know if it'll work. It's a bit awkward. So this is a testate amoeba. So that's one that produces a shell, and it's very rare actually to see them walk out of their shell. When you shake the soil to get a sample, they basically are not there. They normally you'll see them as just this immobile sort of shell looking like this, but this one was moving, and you can see its tentacles or its pseudopods, which are sort of like legs, but they're not. They're just extensions of its body coming out, and that's how it moves. And all these creatures, particularly the fungi, bacteria are always present in the soil, but fungi and all these creatures I'm showing you are basically missing from our soils. So the idea is that we want to replace them so that we can actually get a better outcome for our food, because remember at the beginning I said without these creatures, the foods are not available to the plants, so we're not getting the micronutrition with all the minerals that we need and vitamins and everything. These creatures do that by consuming bacteria and fungi. So basically they feed on a lot of them a day, each of these little creatures. And this is magnified about 400 times. It is magnified 400 times, this particular image. What were you going to say?
It's incredible. It's just like all this is going on underground, it's the underground network, isn't it? And you see all these little creatures, and they all got their place on the planet doing whatever they need to do. But it's just incredible. But this is amazing.
It is very incredible. And some of the stuff you get to see, like, honestly, I don't know what this is. I'm assuming it could be I don't know, it looks like an testate amoeba. Testate just means shelled. But I think because it's got this rotor at the end of it, it's like literally filtering. So it could be an actual rotifer. which I'll get to at the end because I'm going sort of through the different organisms in the order we've viewed them in the original little diagram that I showed you of the poop loop. But you can see how it's spinning these cilia of these little hairs, and all the bacteria are coming into it like a vortex, getting sucked into its mouth basically, and then the organism, you know, churns it out and then spits out the churned up bacteria, and therefore spits out the nutrients that are also in excess that it doesn't need. And that is exactly what plant food is. It's the leftovers from its digestion of the bacteria. And you can see a fungal hypha just here on the right. There is a hypha there, but basically you can imagine fungal hyphae. They grow in this beautiful sort of, what's the name of it? You know, the geometric network that is actually, what's the name of it? There's that mathematical formula that all galaxies and our vein network and our trees grow in that, you know, in that format. And that's what fungi are like. And so they basically,
Fibonacci.
when you plow,
Fibonacci, the golden mean.
Sorry, no,
Fibonacci,
it's the basically.
Okay.
No, it's not. No. Fibonacci is an arrangement within specific number formats, and when you have a network, it splits into smaller and smaller sections, just like trees do or river systems, you know. And this is what I'm talking about. I forget what it's called. I can't believe it. I love that word. I'll remember it later. But you can imagine in the soil, the mycelium network is spreading, and every time you plow, you actually disintegrate it, so it can't recover. Every time we mechanize, we use machinery to disrupt the soil ecosystem. So we've got to grow food in a way where these organisms all die. They get churned up. The sun fries them basically. So none of these creatures live. This is a little ciliate moving about, and they're very quick, and they're really awesome. They like reduced oxygen conditions oftentimes. So if you have them, it's showing you also that your soil is getting a little bit anaerobic, which is not a good sign. But they will live in puddles and any water they're all aquatic creatures living in soil, basically, all of these little fun. It's very fun looking at them under the microscope and chasing them. And this is more of a multicellular organism now. So 80% of animals are actually these guys, and they're called nematodes. So they will eat anything smaller, like liver. You know, the creatures I've just shown you, they'll feed on them and they'll feed on bacteria. And this particular little guy, eats bacteria. They've got special mouth parts designed to take up bacteria into their gut, and they've got a little pump and pump up the microbes into their gut, and once again they'll poop it out and once again fertilize the plants. So once again, nematodes are seen as something bad in the soil because a lot of agricultural crops are infested, heavily infested with the nematodes that are parasitic, but they're not really parasitic. When I dived into the research of it, a lot of them are actually fungal feeders, but because fungi are missing, they're going for the roots because they've got these mouth parts that pierce. They can pierce the fungal cell, but if a plant is not present and they still need to eat, they will go for the plant. So a lot of these fungi, a lot of these nematodes evolved or adapted to eating plants, even though initially they weren't really. There are obviously some plant-feeding nematodes. I'm not saying there aren't, but a lot of them could go either or, but obviously when there's no fungi present, they will go for the plant. This one's more of an omnivore. It's got this big mouth, you can see. So these guys eat potentially smaller nematodes as well. So they will eat bacteria. They won't so much eat fungi. They don't have a piercing mouth part, but anything they can grab on and eat, they will. And there's also ones that are predatory and have teeth, beautiful, big, sharp teeth, and they actually can rip other nematodes apart. But once again, the whole point of it is that every time a creature consumes another creature, a smaller creature, it will release way more nutrients than what it can handle from that smaller creature, and it will always give that excess nutrient to the plant. And all these organisms live right around the plant. That is their role, to be symbiotic with the plant, you could say. They're very much reliant because the bacteria in the soil are all around the plant roots, and so are the fungi, particularly the mycorrhizal fungi, which are the symbiotic fungi that actually extend from the root system of plants. So all these guys need those fungi and bacteria to actually feed on. And without having organic matter upon which fungi can feed on, or plants that are colonized with these fungi, because we're feeding plants fertilizers, we actually don't get, we don't get fungi growing on those plants, and they're supposed to be. That's what God created these guys to actually totally support every plant. And this is why when we have a forest, no one fertilizes a forest. It is this system, these creatures all put into place in the right abundance, in the right amount, with the right ratios between them, that creates the ecosystem and supports giant tree growth. And to me, that is just, I don't know, just to me, it just gives this feeling that just how beautiful it all is, and how every one of these guys has their role, as you said, Andrina, like they have their little role, and yet it's a big role, and if we remove one of them, we're losing. And soil microbes are probably lost in abundance every single moment, because every time we plow, every time we poison, every time we use any chemical of any kind on the soil that isn't meant to be there, it's destroying all these organisms. They have very little resistance to a lot of the chemicals because they are aquatic, and a lot of they don't have lungs. They breathe through their skin. A lot of them absorb water, air through via their skin. So you can imagine that a lot of this is harming them, whatever we do, and it's got huge impacts. And yet it's a free fertilizer, through these beautiful little creatures that are fascinating to watch. There's more fungi in the background there, you can see. But yeah, this is quite a big nematode, actually. I think it's an omnivorous one. It's magnified, probably, I would say, about 100. Yeah. It's probably 100.
Yeah, no, actually,
this is 100 times.
Wow.
Yeah. So they're very little, and nematodes, as I said, 80% of animals are actually nematodes, and there's also these rotifers in the background that I'll show you later what they look like. But very fascinating, very essential, and yet disappearing on a mass scale. A lot of these samples, when I look at the microscope, they don't have these creatures. You don't get them. You have to have a worm farm or a compost, and actually where there's a lot of organic matter. So to really replace these creatures, we need to stop plowing. We need to stop ripping plants out. We need to be eat your plants, of course, and harvest them, but harvest them in a way where it's not disrupting the soil, and leave your root system for these guys to actually decompose, for those fungi and bacteria to feed on root systems, and this one's got eggs in it. That's why I've focused on there. It's got 2 eggs inside, and it's another omnivore with a big sort of a mouth part that allows the consumption of bacteria, but also some of the amoebae, smaller, and particularly, I don't think I've mentioned it earlier, but there's flagellates as well. And at the beginning of the video, there was a little green flagellate sort of moving about as well, where the amoeba was oozing across. But yeah, so it's pretty fascinating stuff, especially when you come across these creatures. Yeah, honestly, like I can spend my entire life doing this, just looking at them, and I've got so many videos and I have never really shared them yet. This is kind of my first time, except for that amoeba video at the beginning. I haven't had time I'm just doing so many things, and it's kind of like, I think people probably would like watching this sort of stuff. Well, now this is a fascinating creature.
This is not something
this is called
see.
No, and tardigrades. This is probably one of the most fascinating find I ever have found, and this was when I was working at Woodfordia for the Woodford Folk Festival. I picked up some mulch from the front of my caravan, and I brought this home, and I looked at it through the microscope. And tardigrades are, if you look them up, you'll be fascinated. They're basically called water bears. They look like a little bear. They're very sweet, and they're strange because they're so small, but they've got legs and with claws. They've got 8 legs, 6 on each side, and little 2 legs that work simultaneously right at the back, and they've got little claws. So they're called, tardigrade means slow walker, but they are so adorable. And, people they became a mascot. People literally make little fluffy toys out of like to honor their existence. But people have been sending them to space. Scientists have been studying them because they can go into this sort of a non-metabolic state and survive for years and years and years without much life in it. And they've been frozen, they've been taken to space, they've been irradiated with all kinds of UV rays. They literally go on space missions, and so do nematodes, by the way. And they can withstand impacts of all this, what average human, well, we would die definitely, and most animals would die. Look at the little face. They've actually got little eyes, 2 little eyes that don't see, but they are light detectors, and that's what makes them so cute. I think once you add eyes into an animal, you've got an animal, right? They've got about 1,000 cells in them, and they expand cells rather than multiplying cells. So they're very, very cute, and they, yeah, as I said, they have been taken to space, and they survive all kinds of tragedies. And just for me, what it means is really that this is magnified 400 times now. The other one was also 400 times, but it was a smaller tardigrade. They're also called moss piglets. So if you ever want to find one, if you have a microscope, I recommend looking at mosses, getting water out of the moss. And that's usually, they need water to survive. So they're literally aquatic organisms as well. All of these creatures are. But these little guys have little claws to walk with, to grab things and feed on. And some of them, they'll eat nematodes, they'll eat other tardigrades, they'll eat all kinds of things. And once again, when they poo, they release those nutrients. But yeah, I can't get enough of looking at these cute little things.
I know, it's
so
amazing.
It was very exciting to find it. Yeah. And see, all this life is under our feet. All of this life that supports our life is under our feet. And what we do is we nuke it with pesticides and stuff, and fertilizers. Fertilizers are salts. So fertilizers kill all these creatures. First of all, the fungi are gone because the symbiotic fungi on the roots are no longer needed by the plant when we give plants fertilizer. So all of these creatures that literally are there designed to feed us, to be part of the system that supports our very life, are basically eliminated. And, this is just a tragedy to me, because it's like, well, not only because we're losing all this cuteness that can be documented by the microscope, but just how cool the system is. It doesn't require us to spend, farmers don't need to spend any money, and you don't need to bottle anything. All of this lives there. It's there. The eggs, a lot of these creatures can be spread by rain. The spores go up into clouds or cysts sometimes as well. So there's all this movement, and they are always there waiting to recolonize the soil. But unfortunately, we just don't allow that to happen every time we do conventional agriculture. And, not only would it save money for the farmer, it would also mean that our plants would be so much more nutritious if we had these creatures present, And look at this. This is a rotifer. So these are, like, honestly, to me, they are the most fascinating just because of the way they look and the way they feed. Once again, they've got these rotors, and all the bacteria is being sucked into. See how there's that movement of bacteria going into its mouth. So these are such crazy creatures. And once again, they love when there's not too much oxygen. So if you do have them in your compost or in your worm farm, it often means there's too much, or in the soil, there's often too much moisture that's not getting absorbed, or it needs to sort of be balanced. So anaerobic soils will often have rotifers. But the good thing is they're there to clean up the excess bacteria. And the whole idea of having fungi and bacteria in specific ratios in the soil means that when that ratio is achieved at a specific, it actually chooses the plants that will grow. So by studying the biomass of bacteria and fungi, we actually can assess what plants can grow in that soil and what it can't grow. And so right now we're trying to grow, in very dead soils, because 2/3 of our soils are gone from the earth. And I mean, like, they're not alive anymore. So they're just dirt, they're dead without these creatures. So if we don't stop, we will run out of food, because that's just the nature of things. Nitrogen fertilizer is expensive to produce, super expensive, super energy intensive. And of course, not everyone has access to it. In third world countries, people can't afford nitrogen fertilizers. You can see it's actually, see that stream coming out. It's actually excreted some of the nutrients. These are bacteria that have been digested. So it's eating bacteria, but also excreting that flow out there that was kind of all churned up. it's basically pooed out bacteria as well. So, so that is what we're supposed to be feeding our plants, and and encourage every single farmer on earth to just stop paying money for things that are just completely unnecessary and get your microbes back in the soil. And that is actually very easy to do by just adding organic matter and just changing a few of your machinery attachments where you no longer destroy the ecosystem. There are so many beautiful farming methods that can be used that are totally abundant, bring abundance without having to spend money. At the beginning, it's a bit harder because your plants are now used to, eating all this junk food that is fertilizer. But we don't need to be sort of thinking, well, I'm just going to stay with something that's bad just because it takes a little while for this to kick in. And it happens quite rapidly once you change the methods and once you have a little bit of an experiment, and yeah. And, every gardener can have these creatures in their soil. And that's what I encourage that we do.
Because
there's a flagellate.
That's what I was going to ask you. It's fascinating because you can see the eyes, and it's like an amazing underground movement that, like I said, not the everyday person would see. So it's really fascinating. No. I'm loving this. So obviously, when I see people say about they got dandelions in the pathways or weeds, and they want what weed killer, and I just say, well, hot water will kill them immediately rather than spraying them with chemicals. But with all the stuff that's been coming down from the skies, how is that affecting the soil? Because I know the soil is so depleted.
Yeah, to be honest, microplastics are probably a bigger problem. We're just killing everything with there's so much that we're inundating. Just like we might not be able to do what's coming from the sky, we might not be able to control that, but we can control our plastic consumption, and that's in our bloodstream. Babies are now born with plastic in our I'll just keep going with this video so you can watch the rest of it. Like there's some other creatures I want to show you as well, but this is the problem, that all of these creatures, when I look at the soil, oftentimes I'll find microplastic in there. There will be microplastics in there, and that ends up in our food chain. It ends up in our water. Babies are born now in breast milk. There is plastic. What is that going to do to their hormones, their entire bodies? The diseases that are going to result are way beyond what we can possibly imagine, So while the air has a lot of chemicals and it comes down in the rain, I don't know, what, I don't think there's anything worse than having plastic in your blood, and we can make the difference by choosing not to buy any of it. Like literally, it's very difficult. But if I just want to say, this was just a surprise when I was taking a rotifer image of a rotifer video, and this creature just came up, and I called it the polka dot snake. But that's what you kind of get to sometimes. You're just like mesmerized, and you just like, what? Like as a child, if I was a kid, instead of playing video games, I'd be going for the microscopy. You could just be addicted for the rest of your life. And
it's obviously your life's passion, isn't
it? Yeah. And so, when you come to think of it in that way, that there are things we can control and there are things that we can't do anything about, like chemtrails. I don't know much about them, but say there are all these things happening, the weather control and all of that.
Yeah.
That's something that we can't do, but we can ask farmers not to spray, because glyphosate is now present in every single. Australia is the highest user of glyphosate, and that's Roundup. And that is so bad. It kills fungi in your body. So actually by doing that, it actually prevents all the networking that fungi do in our own bodies as well. There's just so much evil in spraying, and I'm not saying the farmers are evil. They just have been told that that's the way to go if they want to survive. I'm saying the chemicals that are made, the companies that have made them, they knew that that's going to be a moneymaker, and they basically tell farmers to do it, and farmers oftentimes just don't know what else to do. And I feel for farmers, because they have a huge job for humanity. They feed us. But because consumer demands are so strong, we oftentimes we just want too much. You know, we want the perfect apple and the perfect cucumber. It's like, no, food doesn't have to be perfect. It has to taste good and have all the nutrients. You know, how it looks, it doesn't matter.
Yeah.
And it will look bad a little bit because sometimes an insect will take a bite. But if you have these organisms present, I guarantee you also won't have any like pests, major pests. All of these creatures, they protect the plant, you know, they protect the plant, especially bacteria and fungi. They literally defend the plant. And when you've got all these creatures, then, you know, around the root system to protect, to feed on the bacteria and the fungi, there's biodiversity. So it's very unlikely that a pathogen of any kind or a pest of any kind can even develop. But for example, some of these predatory nematodes and tardigrades and larger sort of like mites and things like that, they actually eat the nematodes that are meant to be consuming our plants. They prefer them because they have more sweetener in them from the plant, because they're feeding directly on the plant. So the plant parasitic nematodes are so yummy to all these other creatures that love to eat nematodes because they're full of plant sugars. So they actually control how many there are. So, you know, it's basically your immune system in these creatures that is present. It's the defenders of the plants. And so then you don't have to have pesticides. You don't have to have fertilizers because they're doing the fertilizing. They're protecting the plants, so you don't need any of the other chemicals. And now you can see that this beautiful love story that happens, you know. There's all these little moving parts, literally moving parts, and they all play a role, and the plant is happy as if it was growing in the forest. So yeah, good question, Andrina. But I think you know, some of these creatures will be able to deal with it, you know, with all the onslaught of chemicals and whatever we're putting in the atmosphere, whatever we're putting into the soils, the plastics and stuff. Fungi are known to eat plastic, bacteria are known to eat plastic, but they need to adapt and evolve, and that's going to take a long time a lot of the times. Yeah. So that's actually a little bacterium. I think it was like a little spirochete, and that's not a good sign when you get one of those. So good thing about microscopy, you can also say in a particular soil whether you've got bacteria that are not good to be in the soil as well, you know. So it's good to do an analysis if you want to know what's in there. Yeah, there's, you know, and this is once again, this creature will consume those. So it's a good indicator that, okay, things are functioning. It's going to eat all the things we don't want. And eventually the system changes, you know, it's very rapid changes occur, like soils dry up and become wet when the rain comes, you know. But with these creatures as well, what we have is water infiltration. So we don't have these gluggy soils that are muddy and full of water that can't infiltrate further down, you know, because we don't have a layer of soil that's been compacted either. When these creatures are present, the soil is spongy and it absorbs a lot of moisture. It holds on to moisture. It's got air in it, so anaerobic organisms which do produce disease, or kind of the plants get sicker without oxygen, and then the organisms start to feed on them. We call the organisms pathogens, but really they're just feeding and cleaning up on what the plant conditions are when the soil is anaerobic. So, someone's just asked a question.
Yeah, so Carol, which is my sister in Glastonbury, she says, I'm curious, would it be better if human waste, poo, etc. went direct to ground via the earth toilets rather than flushing toilets? And is human waste good for the soil?
Oh my gosh, that's an awesome question. That is just one of my favorite questions ever, because I am so passionate. I don't have a toilet. I have a bucket and I have a seat on the bucket, and in a little thing I stand on, because you want to squat when you poo to get it out nicely, straight out of your intestine, out of the sitting on the toilet like a queen. So, you know, yes, you do. You do want that. We want poo to be decomposed by these creatures. Once again, when you can put it through a worm farm, that's the best way. In warmer climates, we have larvae, soldier fly larvae, black soldier fly larvae. They love to eat decomposed poo. I've got a video of my poo being eaten by them, and within 4 hours, the entire big poo is gone. I will put it up one day. I'm still developing the courage to do it, but really, there's nothing courageous about it, because it's such a cool thing to see, like how quickly these organisms consume poo, you know. And then when I looked at it under the microscope, it's all beneficial microbes. There's no nasty anaerobic organisms, even though our poo is obviously anaerobic. There's not much oxygen in our gut, but the larvae deal with it, and composting worms and these black soldier fly larvae decompose poo. And not only that, they actually have bacteria and other organisms in their gut, particular organisms that specifically target pathogenic organisms. So while we're terrified of E. coli and all these organisms we're terrified of, if the conditions aren't there for them to thrive, they will not be there. So there's nothing to be afraid of. We just got to understand how to make sure that those other organisms are present with enough organic matter around the poo, enough, you know, covering the poo properly. And it's wonderful. I mean, it's that poo. I honestly think, and I would love to do this, and I'm part of a we're going to do it in a giant worm farm as part of a project I'm involved in the food production project where I live near Kingaroy in Queensland. And we're actually creating a giant terrace the terrace has already been created, but we're going to make more terraces to create, so we can compost human poo and then actually transform it and feed it to the plants, and then we can eat the plants. And that's exactly how, when I was a kid, my grandfather used to pump the septic system, which you wouldn't call it a septic system. It was just a hole we put in, like, and it was just a, you know, I don't know. I don't think there was anything. I don't know if that's how septic systems normally work, but it was just obviously an old, very old house, 130-year-old house, and there was poo just collected and pee, you know, collected. There was no flush or anything, but all of that went down. And then I don't know how my grandfather ended up pumping it out. I just remember it being taken out of the system, and it went on the garden during winter, and the soil would just rest under the snow cover, and all the organisms, because the snow provides actually quite warm conditions under the snow, like a blanket. And by spring, there was just wonderful soil, you know, that would result. And that's what people do around the world. We're just so sterile in the Western world that we're so afraid of our own poo. And thank you. It's a wonderful.
You know, everybody does it every day. Maybe, well, not every day. I can't speak for everybody else. Like, you know, maybe a few times a day. And I think there's got to be a greater purpose for this than, you know, you know, it's nothing worse than, you know, you step in animals and the smell and you can't get rid of it, you know. But, and I know in Australia and lots of toilets, or, you know, like they got the big holes and everything goes down into the ground, don't they?
Yeah. And, you know, it's a shame, actually. Because I run the soil restoration course on YouTube, this man has come across it, and he basically designed a lot of the systems in Sydney, all around Sydney, for water filtration, you know, all our wastewater that comes through. He told me that the system hasn't changed for over 100 years, and it was based on the numbers of pathogens. I think initially I can't remember what it was that he told me, but it was like the River Thames was basically in London was, I can't remember exactly what he said to me, but there's some sort of a measure that's still being used. You know, it's like so outdated, and the systems haven't changed much. And he's saying how much it costs. He told me it was just insane, $30,000 per person per year to support that system. This is our taxpayers' money in Australia and everywhere else have to support for all of that waste to be dealt with. So first of all, there's a lot of water, obviously, that has to come off. There's a lot of microbes that we don't want in that sludge. But then no one knows what to do with the sludge, and it's super expensive to treat the sludge, to take it off, to mix it in and like store it somewhere. It's insane. $30,000 per year per person. It was just I think that's the numbers. I'll correct myself if I'm wrong on the video comments, but it was insane, and they cost millions of dollars. You know, I think even billions of dollars sometimes, these big filtration plants. And he's saying to me, we've been wrong. Engineers have not talked to microbiologists. So we needed to talk to microbiologists to deal with this differently. So we're kind of working together. We've proposed on how this can be done by using the sludge, the water, and the nutrients, because the nutrients are removed. So like you're removing the nutrients, and then he says you're buying fertilizer to then put it on the like chemical fertilizer where you already had the nutrients in the poo. And he feels very sad. He's retired now, but he's just so passionate about wanting to change what is done, wanting to eliminate the expensive process and the removal of the nutrients and the chemicals that it's crazy. It is so crazy. So he's designed the system, and we're applied for, with Sydney Water, we've applied for maybe the potential of working together on creating a way better system where the sludge before the nutrients are taken away is actually filtered onto the soil matrix, planting trees so the trees can actually grow and produce fruit, because it will never end up in the fruit, any of the chemicals. The rudimentary chemicals and stuff are taken out, but also they settle down, and you can then take it out and do something with it. But there's so much waste. Our poo is amazing. All of this poo I just talked about that we've just viewed, our poo is just as great as your sister said. It's
because she had another
necessary
question
for us. We're going. Yes, please.
Yeah, so great explanation. So she's curious, would the proper burial of bodies with no chemicals, etc., be good? Also good for the soil, because obviously they take a long time to
Carol,
break down.
You're reading my, like, everything I want to do. Like, I literally want to go out and do that. You're reading my soul. Because the other project, besides the poo one, so with God's Way organization, I'm part of an organization that's trying to solve, through development of love in humanity, we're trying to solve all these issues. So we're trying to grow food in a way it's meant to be grown. We're trying to do all these things, and not just trying, but having projects doing it.
Say,
and of
you're
course,
not
a lot
trying,
of it is
you are. Yeah,
we are doing it. We're doing it. And
so,
but the other project, my friend basically, she wants to. She works with dead bodies, so she prepares the dead bodies. She does the whole, thing, and she's just like, it's so chemically ridden. And I've always dreamed of having a cemetery where you grow trees out of people,
Yeah.
And so one way to decompose, and you just basically instead of once again, it's a natural burial. You can't be using, a dress that's made out of plastic. You wrap the body in a lovely gown, or like a wrap that's made out of natural fibers, and then you can decompose the body and compost it. That would be the ideal. And so I'm coming up with, I've just done a excavator course, and literally one of the things I had to do was dig a grave, which is meant to be a trench, but I was like, oh my gosh, now I know how to dig a grave. And it was about the same depth, as it is for the body to be put in there. And some of the experiments I want to do is use roadkill, because we get a lot of wallabies killed on the road as people drive by on the highway, and it's a great way to start experimenting. But the body is full of, once again, heavy metals, plastics, the body itself, and without the creatures. So even if we just bury it, it's better to know that we're burying it in a really rich microbial soup, like in a compost, and with lots of organic matter, so the organisms can deal with all the chemicals we've imbibed, so the fungi can actually decompose those chemicals, absorb all the heavy metals that we're filled with. So absolutely, Carol, we need to be putting, it's another great resource, all the waste, but our bodies are full of nutrients. Besides all the nasty stuff, we're full of nutrients,
So
it's is like the bacteria in the human gut? That's right. Yeah, our human gut is a little bit different, but actually I did read a paper recently, and they talked about, like, a scientific research, and they were comparing how similar the human microbiome is with the soil microbiome, because it's got the nutritional components within the soil and the gut, the water, oxygen availability was our gut is a bit more anaerobic, but it's very similar in the sense that we can literally, when we eat healthy plants, they already have the microbes from the soil on the plant. And when we consume that plant, that goes into our gut with the spores and survive the digestive system, and we actually inoculate our gut. And this paper was saying that we've become so sterilized with all the chemicals, not touching our poo, not having anything to do with our poo at all, that it actually shows that our microbiome is dying in our gut. And the only way to recolonize it is to have a healthy soil microbiome and have our food from that microbiome so that our gut can get recolonized. And the problem is there's also this connection between the gut and the brain. And now scientists are saying that basically a lot of our immune system in our gut and stuff, when it folds down, from all the pesticides we're consuming and everything, it actually affects our mental health as well. So there's a huge body of research happening between lack of soil microbes, and then our brain. So there's all these connections. Of course, it makes sense. It's all interconnected. We're so totally reliant on these creatures from the ground up. Our bodies are made up of all these elements that came from the soil that the bacteria and fungi had to mine, but then some organisms had to consume. Like, we're made up of that. So what's going to happen when we don't have that? Like, what are we going to be born with? In our bodies, like how is this going to function without this baseline, the fungi and the bacteria and all the creatures that consume them? That is what feeds the earth, so without it, I don't know. Also, carbon sequestration, everyone talks about it, raves about it. The only way we can sequester that carbon is through those fungi being present in the soil. So without that, once again, we don't have much hope, and it's very sad.
No, we got to keep the hope going. We just got to know there's a better way, and we're all doing our best, like sharing different things. But Carol says that there are people now making coffins from mycelium, so which are produced very quickly. Because Carol and I had a funeral business called Circles of Life, and we only advised people to have bamboo. We didn't go into these big wooden, they want to sell you the big wooden blah blah blah, lots and lots of money. You don't need all that, but then that was our choice. But so things are happening. So things are things are happening.
Just the mycelium. Sure. And it takes time, and it takes people that are courageous to do something new and do it, and then show to the councils, show to the government that this works. And in Australia we've got a few, in Queensland a few burial. It's a very murky thing that's happening, but my friend and I want to actually set up, we're going to have a meeting next week and do a recording and a conversation between us about our dreams. So she's a medium, so she talks to the spirits of the people that pass, and they come to her when she's preparing the body and stuff. So that was her desire for it, but then she realized how much chemical is being used. So she's helping them because they're very confused. What's going on? They so, but for me, it's the microbiology in the body and the decomposition process and how to grow forests and regenerate landscapes. So I'd like to buy, I don't have the cash, but somehow I hope somehow we can get a piece of land that's really damaged in this area here where we live. And there's lots of damaged pieces of land that have been grazed to the max and, dead land, and regenerate the land by doing decomposition and tree growth. Carol's saying that that'd be awesome to consult with you guys or with Carol about it. And I'd love that, because to me, it's like, there's only a few people doing it the composting way. There's a lot of natural burial, we just put the body in the soil, but doing it that extra step to get rid of the problems, the chemicals, I highly recommend that. It prevents the water getting contaminated, groundwater getting contaminated with all these chemicals. But also, yes, mycelium coffins can be grown easily, very easy to grow. I've grown several objects, so it'd be easy to grow them. Cardboard box can be used as well as a coffin or just a shroud. There's also
there's no need
there's
for
this
all
woman.
These fancy.
We don't need it. No,
exactly. We've seen fancy, unbelievable. But anyway, that's another story.
But also, why would you pay all that just to bury a coffin?
That's right.
And it's got paint on it, and burning people is just as bad, because when you burn the body, once again, all those chemicals go floating out, and if you need, and it's going to trap in space, all the heavy metals return. So we basically rather than doing it what it's supposed to be doing, decomposing in the ground, we're now taking it up into the atmosphere and polluting with those bodies that have been accumulating for sometimes 80 years, these chemicals that we're, eating and consuming and breathing. And It's insane. We are so crazy, but we're such lovely creatures ourselves. We just need education, and that's why my whole thing is let's just
re-educating everybody, isn't it? So let's go back to the very beginning for people that are listening or have got a little garden or want to start making a difference. I know one thing that you said was like not. Because like when the flowers are all dead, most people pull them all out and they might put them on the compost. So what would you say, like just snip off at root level so that the roots are still in the ground, but you haven't got the top bit, would be a starter. I mean, what basic tips for people that think, well, I'd like to start making a difference in my garden. What would I do?
Yeah. Well, first of all, I would compost all my food because like, I don't know, I think it's 10% of the landfill gases like methane that comes off landfill comes from the fact that people don't separate food waste from plastic waste and other things they throw out into landfill. So I would first of all look at my food waste and never ever put a piece of fruit, a skin, or any food whatsoever ever in your bin. I would actually decompose it. And that could be as simple as digging a hole in your yard and chucking it in there and covering it up. But it's even better to actually contain it, probably don't recommend plastic, but come up with a way where you can feed your worms in a sustainable way without using plastic. And that's a tricky one because, everything is these days containers are plastic, but you can come up with a method or recycle the bin that is meant to go to landfill and create a system. And I've got on my website systems on how to do that. So I'm happy to share the link. You can build one if you want. But worms are the best. Seriously, there's nothing better. You don't have to do the composting thing and trying to get the temperature up and stuff. Feed it to the worms. They don't eat a few things like garlic and I would just then feed that directly to the soil. You can do an extract. I've got a whole course online for free on YouTube on how to do all these things. First of all, it comes, with all the creatures we talked about and their superpowers, but then, and also the agricultural side of things, but also really about how to get that soil ecosystem back by putting whatever the worms create from your food waste. So that's one thing. Always collect your leaves. Don't burn them. Like we want that organic matter from leaves. Bring it from your neighbor if they don't want it, Just build that soil layer up, and every plant that dies, just chop and drop, leave it there. Don't take it off. Every weed, use it to its advantage, cut it off, leave it on the ground, unless it's got seeds that you want to remove, obviously, if you don't want that to proliferate, and especially if it's an environmental weed. But all of these components, all of the plants that have grown, that's your biomass, that's your carbon that's been created, allow it to go back to the soil and allow it to be churned by the organisms. Initially, it will just start layering up the top, and then eventually the little creatures and the plant roots and everything will bring it down. The earthworms will start bringing that organic matter down to the soil level, to the root level. So basically just keep layering and sandwiching your organic matter of different kinds, whatever you can get your hands on, There's so much. You just got to be creative. But yeah, in the garden, I would just be doing that, just lasagna gardening, on mass scale. One of my things that I'd like to do is use weeds, because we've got a lot of lantana and things that grow here out of proportion. And we're experimenting once again with God's way. How do we use that resource, because we weed so much, to regenerate the landscapes? But how do we then use that resource to actually feed the soil, So it's all about feeding the soil. And I feel like, once again, whether it's with poo, with human bodies, with honestly, any organic matter, anything that was once alive, it needs to go back to the soil, and that's how we're going to regenerate the soils. That's how we're going to end up with those nutrients in our gut and those microbes in our gut again,
Fantastic.
Yeah.
Wow. So is there anything else that you'd like to share before we go? I know you've given the video of all the little creatures, which is absolutely fascinating. I love that bit. So it's been excuse me, it's been so I can understand your love story of soil.
Yeah, the soil love story. I'm trying to share some images because I passed them on to you guys, but obviously Jeff can't show them. and I'd like to show them because they're kind of important.
Yeah, I know there were some other images, so yeah, if you can.
It doesn't let me. I think because they're PNG, so they won't let me. So I'm not really sure how to do it, but I can just try maybe share screen, and maybe, let's see. It's only showing me. Yeah. Well, I wanted to share a link with you guys to the soil restoration course because that's my baby, and
We
that's
can put
how
it
I sort of you know, oh yeah, I do have I basically run it for free because I've decided that this beautiful love story can't be like, you know, I can't charge for it. I felt really compelled not to, because I realized that every single time these creatures do something, it's a gift, you know. It just felt really bad, but I didn't realize how hard it was going to be to actually then survive financially, you know. So sometimes people give me a donation, and the course doesn't have that option. So I wanted to give you a like a PayPal what's it called, QR code, if anyone's interested in supporting these projects, because I'd love to do them, but I don't know how much longer I can sustain myself without an income, you know. And I'm doing all the microscopy and all of this stuff. I want to share everything I have, you know, so much data that I've gathered, all these beautiful videos of creatures, and just want to keep going with the practical things on the soil restoration course. At the moment, it's just been theory and lessons, created like 20-minute lessons that are, you know, about anything to do with these creatures and farming particularly, but also soil restoration for revegetation, and just basically overall how to regenerate ecosystems. But I then want to show it hands-on. So the projects that I'm recording, I want to be able to do this as a job for the rest of my life, so that we've got some thing to show, you know, and so people can, and when we start decomposing bodies, like obviously we can't do for, you know, law reasons, we can't take the body out and kill it going, I would love to see what's under there, but how it's done, and interviews with people and talk about all these things, you know. And so that's my dream, basically, just to actually put these things into action. Like the course is one thing, but to do it hands-on and show people how to do it, I think that's going to be you know, that's what people need, really. But I do believe that understanding the system, the ecosystem, and how it functions is the number one thing. Initially, you need to get to know about it, fall in love with it, and then you get passionate about it, and then you're doing something about it. If you just go, oh yeah, cute, blah, 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 you know, but not understanding, it's the understanding. And then with the heart, when you understand with the heart, it takes it to another level, you know. And I think that's just happened for me. I just stood it with my heart. It overwhelmed me with joy and just fascination, you know. And I think if and there's lots of people that care, and there are a lot of people that want this information. It's just got to be made available, and I think YouTube is a great way. So that's where it is. I don't do social media in the Facebook or anything like that anymore. But you know, that's where it's at. And I just think I'd rather spend the time creating the videos, you know, to share, and always open to interviews and all kinds of things. So if anyone wants to talk, and as Carol said, to do some consultations, always there to do that. So and
I've also linked you with Bronwyn Holmes, who we had on the show well within this last year. So I've sent you her details, and vice versa, and I've sent you her video, and she's got yours, so you can connect. So I'm sure you know, together you can, there's a lot more you can do together. And it's, you know, and it's creating that network, is linking the dots with, like, you know, I think, oh, Bronwyn and you know, where could it go from there? So it's just putting people in contact and you know, building a bigger dream in the dream of bringing the people together who are networking, caring and sharing. Is so important now more than ever.
I've actually got a few friends. I did a presentation for the UK 2 months ago, maybe now, with the Soil Squad, and a lovely little organization that's just a woman that's passionate. Two women, actually. They work for two different organizations, but the Soil Squad is about collecting food waste, and then they compost it, and then they grow food and educate children and things. So I think you might want to be interested in talking to them as well. There's a lovely lady called Vicky. And just once again, connecting the dots, and you're in the UK, so it's a nice little connection having a neighbor somewhere in the little country that is doing something really great.
It's always lovely to have different people sharing. So yeah, if you connect me when we finished or whenever, but it's like the different connections, like people say, oh, so and so would be lovely for the show, and then so it's just linking all the dots along the way.
Yep, exactly. Well, thank you so much, guys, for having me. If there's anything else you'd like me to say, please let me know. But otherwise, it's just been lovely talking about this, and I've never done it in the video format, so that's my first time where I've decided to go. It's better to see them moving than just pretty pictures.
Well, and I think like with you sharing the pictures and the movement and seeing them like magnified so many times, and these are real little creatures doing their bit for humanity or for the planet, however you want to look at it, it's just, for me, it's opened up a different world that I wasn't really aware of. And it's going to be the same for other people, realizing there's so much more going on, and people are now more ready to, more aware, if you like, of different things that are going on that maybe not in alignment. Okay, well, what can we do to change it? It's like not about moaning and groaning, well, blah, blah, blah. It's sort of like, well, what can I do to make a difference, and that's the thing. That's what we're all doing each day in different ways, making a difference, helping people, and just changing the way things were to a higher vibration.
To me it's all about, if we love ourselves, we will love everything about our life, as in our life that's been given, but also we will recognize that everything is so precious and it's all filled with life. Every single thing is filled with life, and life is what makes life. And and I just feel that we've been so disconnected from sort of life itself. We've taken ourselves out of nature, and sit in front of screens all day, every day. Majority of people are so disconnected, and I just find that very, very sad, because, well, I suppose for me personally, it brings me a lot of joy to be able to see things in nature, and when it's disappearing, it makes me sad as well, because like, well, what joy will there be? And I know there's other joys to have, our relationships with each other, but at the same time, it's like we're missing this vital connection. And I think when our heart's open to that, it's all about really like us wanting to love each other, love the world, love our life, And I think it's just that, really, just wanting love rather than wanting the misery that we've been conditioned to believe that's all we've got. There's all these conditionings, and I think undoing those conditionings is going to be the challenge, but also taking the action to do things differently, I'm finding, is also a challenge. But if we do it and we go ahead and follow our dreams and discover our passions, we are going to be much happier, and we'll want to care more for everyone else, including ourselves and the environment as a result, And God's always waiting to help us. So
exactly. Well, thank you so much. It's been an absolute delight to connect with you again and see you and what you're doing. I wish you all the luck in the world, that you get what you need to be able to carry on doing what you're doing, because it's phenomenal. So thank you once again, and I'd love to have you, or we, to come back another time later on when you've got more to share.
Yeah, I'd love that. Thanks so much, guys. Thanks for making the effort, the time, inviting me, and and enjoying this little bit of time we've spent together. Enjoy your trip, Jeff, and Andrina, you have a great day ahead of you. So I'm going to say good night and thank you, and see you soon again, hopefully.
Right. Well, thank you, everybody, for tuning in this.
Right.
Thank you.